Hey guys, HackerSploit here, back again with another video. Welcome back to the penetration testing bootcamp. In this video, or in this set of videos, we will be taking a look at the various Windows privilege escalation techniques or vectors that you can use to elevate your privileges on a Windows system. And again, this is part of the pen testing bootcamp. So we've covered post-exploitation. We're now moving on to PrivEsc. We'll also be covering PrivEsc on Linux. So again, I just want to make sure that we all have an understanding of where we are and where we're going. Now, I've been getting a lot of messages regarding the log4j or the log4 shell vulnerability and how to exploit it. And I'm currently working on an in-depth video that covers the exploitation, not just of the vulnerability on Minecraft servers, but also on the various Apache solutions out there. So do stay tuned for that. In this video, we'll be focusing primarily on performing local enumeration with a script or a tool called winPEAS, which you guys have seen me use before. The objective of this video is again to perform local enumeration on the system in order to identify the various vulnerabilities that we can essentially exploit to elevate our privileges. And this, the room that we'll be utilizing is the Windows PrivEsc room on TryHackMe. It's a free room and it's an intermediate room. So the objective here is to essentially elevate our privileges to the highest level. I've already started the actual machine here, and let me just copy the IP there. And as you can see, there are various techniques that we'll be exploring. And in my view, this is pretty much one of the best rooms on TryHackMe that goes over the various privilege escalation vectors on Windows. So without further ado, the primary access vector is via RDP. So again, we're not exploiting anything on the target system, although that could be an option. But we'll just copy the xfree RDP command here to essentially start up an RDP session. You're free to use Ramina if you want as well. So there we are. That'll open up the RDP session for us. And we'll give that a couple of seconds. It looks like it's a Windows Server box. So we'll just wait for that to load up. It looks like it's starting up CMD for some reason. There we are, Windows Server 2019 evaluation. Now, if we take a look at the instructions here, you can see that we're logging in as an unprivileged user. So I just want you to take note of that because that's very important. So again, as I said, we're going to be using a tool called winPEAS to perform enumeration. In the previous set of videos within the post-exploitation series, I covered how to perform manual enumeration on Windows, and we were primarily focused on performing enumeration on an Active Directory environment. But again, the techniques are also to some degree applicable on a standard Windows system. So what is winPEAS? Well, winPEAS is essentially a binary or a tool that can be used to essentially automate all the traditional information gathering checks that you'd perform on a Windows system. And more specifically, it actually gives you important diagnostic information regarding vulnerable services, more to do with elevating your privileges, but just basically it really gives you a comprehensive rundown of the system configuration, any misconfigurations or vulnerabilities that we can take advantage of, so on and so forth. All right, now the GitHub repository will be in the description section. And you can see that right over here, we have the batch file as well as, the bat file, as well as the exe binaries here. So if I click on that, you can see you have the source code. So you can actually go through it and compile it yourself if you're not comfortable or if you're not, if you don't feel safe, just downloading and executing a binary off the internet. So I'll click on winPEAS here and you can see there we are. That's the source code there. So I'll just take a step back. And if we take a look at the binaries, we have the obfuscated releases, which have been obfuscated. So if you click on that, you can see that you have the .obfuscated binaries, and then you have your obfuscated binaries here. So they're sorted based on the target operating system architecture. So you have 32-bit, 64-bit, as well as any architecture, which will run on pretty much both 32-bit and 64-bit versions of Windows. In this case, it looks like it's Windows Server, so it's a 64-bit system. So we'll be utilizing the 64-bit binary. There we are. And again, you can just download it onto your Kali system. And then in terms of transferring it, you can transfer it onto the target system via cert util or through a interpreter session. So as for the tasks here, that's already done. So we'll hit completed. And if we move to the first or the second task here, which essentially involves generating a reverse shell executable as our primary access vector. So the technique highlighted here essentially involves setting up an SMB server and then transferring it over to the target via our RDP session. I pretty much prefer utilizing a utilizing the web delivery Metasploit module. So that's what I'm going to be doing. Although you can also follow along with the techniques highlighted here. All right, so I'll open up a new tab here and I'll start up MSF console. And what we'll do is we will essentially generate a PowerShell command that will then execute on the target system, and that'll provide us with a Meterpreter session, after which we can perform the enumeration with winPEAS. All right, so we'll give that a couple of seconds there. All right, there we are. It looks like it's starting up. MSF usually takes a few seconds. There we are. I'll search for the module, and of course I covered how to use it, so you should be familiar with it now. I'll just hit copy and we'll hit paste, and then we want to set the target as PowerShell, and we will use the binary option. So there we are. Let me set that up correctly, binary, and then set the payload. If we show the options now, you can see we still need to set up the payload. So I'm going to say set payload, and then we can set up the PowerShell payload. So I'm going to say PowerShell. So that is not PowerShell, but we're going to set the payload to Windows, and then we'll say PowerShell, and we're using a non-staged module here. So PowerShell reverse TCP, show the options again, and we're going to set the lhost option. So let me just check out my IP here. So IP config, and tunnel 0 is the interface. So I'll copy that there. So I'll say set lhost, and we'll leave the L port as port 4444, which is fine. So show options. And we then need to set up a few other options. One of them is going to be an advanced option. So show advanced. There we are. And the option we want to disable is the PowerShell encode option. So let me see if I can find that here. So that's PowerShell encoded command. We're going to set that to false. So I'm going to copy that. Sorry, let me just get that done there. And we're going to say set PowerShell encoded command to false. There we go. And if we now hit exploit, we should get the PowerShell code that we can then we can then execute on the target system. So I'll give that a couple of seconds there. There we are. It's generated it for us, and it starts up the handler. So we'll copy that, and we'll then head over here and we'll open up a command prompt. So I'll give that a couple of seconds because, you know, this is a VM after all. Well, not a VM, it's a cloud instance. And of course, resources are going to be scarce. So I'll just paste that in there. And of course, you can get rid of the hidden option there so that it executes and doesn't close up the window if you want to actually know whether there are any errors. I'll just hit enter. And that should open up a PowerShell window here, which means that it's executed successfully. There we are. And it should send the stage. There we are, delivering the payload, and we'll give that a couple of seconds. There we are, looks like that is done. Delivering payload is done. Any errors there? Nothing there. Have we got a Meterpreter session? Probably. There we are, PowerShell session. Well, sorry, we actually need to upgrade the PowerShell session into a Meterpreter session. So if we say sessions, you can see we have the PowerShell session there. So I'm going to upgrade the command shell or the PowerShell shell into a Meterpreter shell, and that can be done by using the sessions U option. And the session we want to upgrade is session 1. There we are. Don't worry if it gives you the error that this may not be compatible with this module. That's simply just a message to actually inform you, to keep you aware of that. So there we are, sending the stage. And we should get a Meterpreter session on the target system. There we are, Meterpreter session 2 opened. Sessions, there we are. And we get a 64-bit session. So sessions 2, let's perform some basic enumeration. So sysinfo, get use ID. And then of course you can pop a native command shell and then essentially, perform all of the commands that we had taken a look at previously. In this case, however, we're just going to navigate to the root of the C drive and into the temp directory, which is where I want to save the winPEAS binary, and then I can upload it. So I can say upload, And in my case, I've saved the winPEAS binary on my desktop under Windows enum. And then of course, I have winPEAS. There we are. There's the folder. And then I'm going to upload winPEAS x64.exe, upload that there. And we'll give that a couple of seconds to actually complete. There we are. Looks like it's completed. And then, of course, we can pop a shell here. And we're currently within the temp directory, which is great. And we can then execute the winPEAS executable. So winPEAS x64.exe. However, before you do that, you can open up the help menu right over here. Now, this is very important because if you run winPEAS by default or just without any arguments or any other options, it's going to go through all of the enumeration, right? So it's going to enumerate all of this information right over here. So it's going to enumerate the domain information if it's part of a domain, system information, user information, process, service, etc., etc. So if you're specifically looking for a specific set of information like the user information, I can specify that. So I can say winPEAS x64.exe, and then I can say user information. So user info, hit enter. That'll only enumerate the user information here. So we'll give that a couple of seconds. There we are. Let's take a look at what information this will give us because this is quite important. So first and foremost, you can see that it'll go through the following checklist. So it'll check if it's part of a domain, getting the user account info, the group list, active user list, disabled users, admin users, and files or directories that we can essentially search. So check if you have some admin equivalent privileges. You can see that the current user is not part of the admin group, so we don't have any elevated privileges. We have an admin user that's part of the administrator group, as well as the administrator account. And then, of course, we have our current user account. The rest are guest accounts and the default account, which is disabled on modern versions of Windows. As for the other piece of information, you can see you have your token privileges here. And then, of course, logged on users. It'll only tell us that we are currently logged on, which is very important. Then display information about the local users, which we've already gone over. But you can get the user ID to identify whether that user is administrator, etc., etc., right? Okay, so the users that have logged on to the system, administrator, admin, user, okay, so on and so forth. You get the idea. Now, we can enumerate all the information, as I said previously, by simply saying winPEAS x64.exe, right? So I'll hit enter. And in this particular context, the reason why I'm using winPEAS is because winPEAS will actually help you identify all of these privilege escalation vectors and whether or not the system is vulnerable to any of them, right? So it'll tell you whether you have any insecure service permissions, unquoted service paths, weak registry permissions, insecure service executables, auto runs, the always install elevated vulnerability, weak registry permissions, so on and so forth, right? So let's go back here. You can see it's still going through the check, and I'm just going to wait for it to complete, and then I'll take you through it step by step. And that'll pretty much conclude this video, because we'll then move on to the first privilege escalation vector. So if we take a look at the results from the beginning, most of it is going to be diagnostic information pertinent to processes that are currently running, the networking information like the interfaces, which can be useful if you're trying to pivot. It'll also enumerate other information that can be quite useful, but again, we'll get to that in a few seconds, right? So there's quite a lot of information here, and you can see we have path injection vulnerabilities that have been detected, but let's take a look at the beginning here. All right, so there we are. That's where it begun. So first and foremost, it'll get the system information, so the host name, the version of Windows, the release ID or the build version of Windows, the architecture, the actual current version, the time zone, which can be quite important, as well as the keyboard language, and then whether or not it's a part of a domain, the hotfixes installed, etc. Now, as for the vulnerabilities that it identifies with Watson here, these are going to be vulnerabilities pertinent to the kernel or, parts of the Windows operating system that can be exploited to elevate privileges. And of course, we'll be exploring kernel exploits in the next video as we progress, but this is where you typically find that information. So you get the exploit DB code or reference link if there is a publicly available exploit, and then you get the reference link which could contain the exploit code or a proof of concept. All right, so for the installed updates, it'll give you the hotfix ID, when it was installed, and then of course the description and the title, which is very important, right? So in this case, you can see that the Microsoft updates are pertinent to, one of them is pertinent to Windows antivirus or Windows Defender. And then of course there's a driver install, which is VMware, which tells us that this is indeed a virtual machine. Okay, the user environment variables, which can be quite useful. And then of course the system environment variables, so you can see that the temp directory is specified there. The actual path and driver data directories are specified, so on and so forth. All right, let's take a look at some of the other options here. LSA protection, right? So this is very important. So if enabled, a driver is needed to read LSAS memory. So again, it tells us right over here that LSA protection is not enabled. We'll get to why that is important. And then of course, credential guard is not enabled. We don't have, it looks like we have cached creds, which tells us right over here, cached logon count is set to 10, right? So credentials will be cached in the registry and accessible by the system user. So we'll only be able to access credentials, once we've elevated our privileges. No antivirus was detected. So it tells us that Windows Defender has been disabled. In this case, it makes sense because we were able to execute the PowerShell code natively without encoding it, right? User access control status or UAC status, it tells us that any local account can be used for lateral movement. So we can pretty much elevate our privileges directly if we were to try that right now via UAC, and I'll cover that as well. But that's very, very important, right? Because that's one of the most common Windows privilege escalation vectors that you typically utilize, is trying to bypass UAC. And of course, there's various techniques or Metasploit modules that can be used to do that. Let's take a look at some of the other options here that I can actually go through. So let's take a look at an example check here. If we are trying to look for maybe, let's see, insecure service permissions, let's see if we can find information pertinent to that. So again, this is just the system configuration there. User information, which we enumerated, there we are. And then of course the home folders there, RDP sessions, the password policy, which will tell you the minimum password, the minimum and maximum password age, the minimum and maximum password length, or rather the minimum password length, which again can be used to get an idea of, of the length of the password if you're performing password cracking. The print logon services, interesting processes. Right, so right over here, you can see that it identifies winPEAS as an interesting process that we can essentially perform DLL hijacking, although in this case, that's really not relevant. Let's see if we can find, there we are. So services information, we're looking for insecure service permissions. There we are. So this is where you'll identify the weak service permissions. So for example, the file permission service, which is a vulnerable service that has been set up to demonstrate this vulnerability. You can see that this particular service, it gives you the actual path to the exe or the service. The current status is stopped, and we can start or stop it because the file permissions are set to everyone. So any user on the system can access that service or interact with the service, and we'll actually explore that. For unquoted service paths, or there we are, that's the vulnerability there. You can see we have the AWS light agent there. So no quotes or spaces detected there, and we can possibly exploit that. And of course, we have the actual unquoted service, here that we will be exploiting. So no quotes or spaces detected. All right, so of course, this will tell you whether you can modify any service or registry, and in this case, you can see that we can essentially modify the registry service, which again has been set up to demonstrate this. DLL hijacking, that's the winPEAS directory, so that's really not relevant there. Unquoted service path, so there we are. It identifies that as well there, and then of course we have an auto run program there. so on and so forth. So you can see already with winPEAS, we've been able to identify the actual services that we can exploit in the case of, the unquoted service path, as well as insecure service permissions, as well as the weak registry permissions. And then, of course, you can go through it and, enumerate as much information as possible regarding the type of privilege escalation vector you want to use, right? So this is all path injection, so on and so forth. Let's scroll right over here. So it looks like we have unquoted and space detected there. That doesn't look like it's vulnerable. And let's just scroll here. There we are. We have the scheduled applications here. So this will essentially check if you can modify other users' scheduled binaries. So there we are. It looks like this is save credentials.bat, and we can perform some DLL hijacking there, although that's not really important to us. The other information here that I was trying to highlight, because that's quite important. There we are. Right. So right over here, this will look for Kerberos tickets if you are on an Active Directory environment, and it'll then tell you the actual security package credentials. So you can see it's telling us that we're using NTLM version 2. So keep that in mind if you're trying to perform password cracking. Now it's already given us our hash here, so we can use these hashes in different ways, and we'll also be exploring how to perform the pass the hash attack, which I've explored previously. So you really don't need to crack credentials unless it's necessary. But we get, passwords or credentials from other services or applications. And in this case, you can see that we get a PuTTY session, and we get the proxy username and proxy password. So we've been able to gather information there. Cloud credentials, nothing there. Unattended files, we have the unattended.xml file, which can possibly contain the Windows administrator credentials if the file has not been redacted. But in this case, we get the administrator. It looks like the password there, and this is of course for the admin user. So we can possibly try and authenticate because we've already got the credentials. So let's actually try that now. Do I need to log out, or can I just switch my current session there? Yeah, so I'm just going to sign out of that. And we'll give that a couple of seconds there. And let me see if I can copy that. Pretty sure that has been in base 64 encoded, but you can pretty much log in. Let's see if we can log in like so. Yeah, let's just sign out anyway. I think we might lose our interpreter session, but that's fine. We can try the admin or administrator. I think that's the correct user. Administrator. And we can paste it in there. If this doesn't work, then we can try and decode it. So I'll hit enter. Looks like, yep, it looks like there's an issue with the authentication. So what we can do is let's try and decode it. So I'm just going to create a file here called hash, and I'll paste in the hash there, and we can then decode it using the base 64 utility. So base 64 decode hash. And it looks like the password is password 123, right? So let's just take a note of that. There we are. And you can also utilize other tools if you want. So I'm just going to log in via RDP again. Let me just go back in here, and let me just copy the command there. And we can then log in as administrator, and let's see whether that actually works, because we pretty much have, evaded any of this here. So 1, 2, 3, and we'll change that to administrator. But of course, we're not going to rely on this because the unattended file, I'll get to that in a second and what it's used for. It looks like we have an issue there. Let me just try and add, sorry, try and hit enter. Was that part of the password? Yeah, so I think what I'll do, we can also try the admin user. Because it's not specified what user within the unattended files is, the user account for this particular password, but we can check it. It looks like it's the admin user. So there we are. We're able to log on as the admin user, and we should have elevated our privileges, right? So again, as I said, winPEAS is an extremely powerful tool, and that's really what I'm trying to demonstrate here. This is one of the vectors that you can utilize, and we pretty much explored it. I believe it's covered somewhere here. It may have been covered, although I'm not really sure, but there we are. You can utilize that, and that's something that I've covered in my book, so you can actually learn more about that, right? So the unattended file, if you're not familiar with it, is a configuration file that's created to, it's essentially created when you're mass installing Windows systems, on a network. So let's say you've been tasked to actually install, Windows on more than 5 systems. You can automate the account creation process through the unattended configuration file, where you can specify the administrator credentials and any other, operating system specific configurations that you want set up during the installation process. So again, sometimes it's not cleaned up by administrators. So if it's not cleaned up, you can get the admin credentials from there, and you don't have to go through the process of elevating your privileges manually. And of course, our interpreter session right over there died because we signed out, so we didn't set up persistence. So we can just terminate that there. And if we list out our sessions, I think we've lost all our sessions. Do we have? There we are. Okay. So what we can do is generate a new. It looks like that job is still running. So jobs, kill, and we can then hit exploit again, generate the PowerShell code, execute it with the admin user, and we'll then get a interpreter session with administrative privileges. All right, so I think I've covered how to use winPEAS. As I said, you can take a look at the help menu if you're looking for specific sets of information. But I would recommend, running it at least once, running it by the default configuration at least once, and then going through all the information step by step, because you really don't want to miss out anything there. All right, so now that we've taken a look at how to identify these vulnerabilities, these privilege escalation vulnerabilities, in the next set of videos, we'll be exploring these privilege escalation attack vectors and taking a look at how they can be exploited in order to elevate our privileges. We've already explored one of them, but I didn't want to get into that, but I just wanted to show you how powerful this tool is. All right, so that's going to be it. As I said, the log4shell video will be coming out, so stay tuned for that. It's going to be an in-depth video that covers exploitation as well as patching. And yeah, we'll be taking a look at that as well. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section. If you want to reach out to me, you can do so on our Discord server. The link to that is in the description section, or you can contact me directly via Twitter. And yeah, thank you very much for watching, and I'll be seeing you guys in the next video. A huge thank you to all of our Patreons. Your support is greatly appreciated, and this is a formal thank you. So thank you Shamir Douglas, Ryan Carr, Sandor, Michael Busby, Sid Saab, Doozy, Tafim Bari, Dustin Umpress, and Michael Hubbard. Your support is greatly appreciated, and you keep us making even more high quality content for you guys. So thank you.